Okay, getting right into it today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into a case that honestly left me feeling pretty disturbed when I first read about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one.
It's a recent UK news article about online predation, specifically something called catfishing, and the really awful consequences it can have.
It's a harsh reminder that the digital world can be just as dangerous as the real one, sometimes even more so for young people.
Exactly. And this article focuses on the case of Simran Thomas. She was only 12 years old when she took her own life.
Oh, wow.
And what makes this case even more tragic is that her suicide is directly connected to someone all the way in the UK, a man named Alexander McCartney, who's using some really manipulative tactics to exploit her online.
So you're saying he was intentionally targeting young people online?
That's right. And this case is really horrifying on so many levels, not just because of what happened to Simran, but also because it shows how calculated these online predators can be.
Okay, so I think a lot of people have heard the term catfishing, but maybe not everyone fully understands how serious it can be. Can you break down exactly what it is and why it can be so dangerous?
Absolutely. Catfishing basically means creating a fake online persona to deceive people. In this case, McCartney was posing as a young girl himself on platforms like Snapchat.
Wow, so he was pretending to be someone else entirely.
Yeah, and he specifically targeted young people between the ages of 10 and 16.
So he was preying on their innocence and their desire for connection.
Exactly. He built trust with these kids under completely false pretenses. It's just sickening.
That's awful. So how did he actually go about exploiting them once he gained their trust?
Well, according to the article, once he had their trust, he would start asking for pictures and then use those pictures to blackmail them for even more explicit content.
It's a classic pattern of abuse, but what I don't understand is how can this guy in the UK end up being charged with the death of a girl in West Virginia?
That's where it gets really interesting, legally speaking. Even though McCartney didn't physically harm Cimarron, the court recognized that his actions, his constant blackmail and psychological torture were a direct cause of her suicide.
So even though they were thousands of miles apart, his actions in the UK directly led to her death in the US.
Exactly. And this case is so important because it sets a legal precedent for holding these online predators accountable for the real-world consequences of their actions, even across international borders.
Wow, that's significant.
And the article highlights some truly chilling details about McCartney's behavior. Apparently, he was giving her a countdown online as he demanded more pictures, and his final message to her was, "Goodbye and good luck."
That's just bone-chilling. The level of cruelty is unimaginable.
And to make this even more tragic, Cimarron's father, a U.S. Army veteran, couldn't cope with the loss of his daughter, and he took his own life 18 months later.
The ripple effect of these crimes is just devastating. It's a stark reminder that the trauma extends far beyond the immediate victims.
It's truly heartbreaking. The article goes on to say that McCartney pled guilty to 185 charges, including manslaughter, blackmail, and inciting a child to engage in sexual activity. The scale of his crimes is mind-boggling.
185 charges. That's unbelievable. How many victims are we talking about here?
The police believe he may have had as many as 3,500 victims worldwide.
3,500. That's a truly horrifying statistic. This is clearly a much bigger problem than many people realize.
Absolutely, and it highlights the urgent need for greater awareness education and preventative measures to protect young people from falling prey to these predators.
I agree. We need to understand how these predators operate and what makes their tactics so effective.
You mentioned earlier that McCartney's actions were part of a deliberate method. What is it about catfishing that makes it so effective at exploiting people's vulnerabilities?
Well, it really plays on some fundamental human needs and weaknesses. First, it taps into our desire for connection and belonging. Especially during adolescence, we crave relationships and validation, and online platforms can seem like a safe space to explore those needs.
So these predators exploit that desire for connection by creating these false personas to lure in unsuspecting victims.
Exactly, but it goes deeper than that. It also preys on our insecurities, our fears of rejection and judgment. Adolescents are often struggling with self-esteem and body image issues.
And these predators can exploit those insecurities using flattery and manipulation to gain their trust.
Right, and we can't forget about the role of anonymity. The internet provides a sense of detachment from reality, which can make it easier for people to do things they wouldn't dream of doing face-to-face.
So you're saying the perceived anonymity of the online world can embolden people to act in ways they might never consider in real life.
Exactly. It creates a distance, a sense of being removed from the real-world consequences of their actions.
So it's a combination of factors: the desire for connection,
Mhm.
the vulnerability of adolescence, the anonymity of the internet. It creates this perfect storm for exploitation.
And that's why it's so important to understand not just the tactics these predators use, but also the underlying psychology that drives their actions.
It's like a horrifying puzzle where all these pieces fit together to create this truly disturbing picture. And this case really raises so many questions about online safety, especially for young people. Where do we even begin to address a problem of this magnitude?
That's the million-dollar question, and I think it requires a multifaceted approach. We need to look at this from all angles: the psychological impact on victims, the legal and law enforcement response, the role of social media platforms, and most importantly, the role of parents, educators, and communities in promoting online safety and awareness.
Okay, let's break that down. First, I'm really curious to get your insights into the psychological impact of online predation on young people. We've talked about the manipulation tactics, but what are the lasting effects of this kind of abuse?
Well, the psychological scars can be really deep. Victims of this type of abuse often experience a range of intense and debilitating emotions: shame, fear, guilt, isolation, and a profound sense of betrayal. They might withdraw from social interactions, struggle with self-esteem and body image issues, and have difficulty trusting others.
And in Simran's case, it seems like those feelings were so overwhelming that she felt trapped with no way out.
Yeah, and it's a tragic reminder that online predation can have life-altering and even fatal consequences. The manipulation and blackmail can create a sense of utter hopelessness and despair.
So how do we as a society even begin to address this complex and deeply disturbing issue? What are some concrete steps we can take to protect young people from falling victim to these predators?
Well, I think the conversation needs to shift from awareness to action. We need to start by fostering open and honest conversations about online safety both at home and in schools. Parents and educators need to equip young people with the knowledge and skills to navigate the digital world safely and responsibly.
Okay, so education is key. But what does that look like in practice? What specific skills and knowledge should we be focusing on?
Well, we need to teach young people how to identify red flags, to be discerning about the information they share online, and to understand the potential consequences of their actions in the digital world. It's about developing critical thinking skills and media literacy so they can recognize manipulation tactics and make informed choices about their online interactions.
So it's not just about telling them to be careful online. It's about giving them the tools and the critical thinking skills to navigate the complexities of the digital world safely and responsibly.
Exactly. We need to empower them to be savvy digital citizens, capable of recognizing and avoiding potential threats. And that empowerment starts with education and open dialogue.
This is all incredibly valuable information, and I think it's crucial for us to dive deeper into those specific strategies for promoting online safety. But before we do that, I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room, the role of social media platforms in all of this. These platforms provide the very spaces where these predators operate. So what responsibility do they bear in preventing this kind of abuse?
Yeah, that's a question that's being debated a lot right now. And for good reason, social media platforms have a moral and, I'd argue, a legal obligation to create safer online environments for their users, especially for young people.
So it's not just about providing a platform for connection. It's about actively working to prevent harm on those platforms. What concrete steps can these companies take to live up to that responsibility?
It's a multi-pronged approach that involves technological solutions, policy changes, and a fundamental shift in their approach to user safety. I think we need to see more investment in content moderation, age verification systems, and better mechanisms for reporting abuse.
Those all sound like steps in the right direction, but I imagine it's a constant game of cat and mouse, with predators always finding new ways to exploit the system.
You're absolutely right. Technology alone isn't a silver bullet. We need to go beyond just reacting to abuse and invest in proactive strategies that prevent it from happening in the first place.
So what would those proactive strategies look like?
Well, one promising area is the use of AI and machine learning to detect and flag potentially harmful content and behavior patterns. These technologies can analyze huge amounts of data to identify red flags that might indicate grooming or predatory behavior.
So it's about using technology not just to remove harmful content after the fact, but to actually identify and intervene in potentially dangerous situations before they escalate.
Exactly. It's about creating a more proactive and preventative approach to online safety. And that involves investing in sophisticated technologies that can analyze user behavior, identify patterns of abuse, and flag potential threats in real time.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential in AI and machine learning. But it's also kind of unnerving to think about those technologies having access to so much of our personal data.
You raise a valid point. There are definitely ethical considerations about using AI and data privacy, and it's really important to have open and transparent conversations about those issues as we develop and implement these technologies.
It's a tough balance between protecting user privacy and using data responsibly to create safer online spaces.
Absolutely. We need to figure out ways to leverage the power of technology without compromising individual rights and freedoms. It's a complex challenge, but one that we have to address if we want to create a safe and equitable digital world.
This conversation has really opened my eyes to the complexities of this issue and the need for a comprehensive approach to address it. But before we move on to discuss those broader strategies for prevention and intervention, I want to go back to the tragic case of Samaran Thomas and the impact this crime had on her family. Her grandparents released a statement urging parents to keep communication open with their children about online dangers.
It's a heartbreaking reminder that even in the digital age, open communication and strong family relationships are our most powerful weapons against online predators.
So it's not just about technology and policies, it's about human connection, trust, and open dialogue.
Absolutely. Technology can be a powerful tool for good or for evil, but ultimately it's the human element that will determine whether we create a digital world that is safe, inclusive, and empowering for everyone.
I think that's a really important point to emphasize as we move forward in this conversation. It's not about demonizing technology. It's about using it responsibly and ethically to create a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
I couldn't agree more. Technology is just a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for constructive or destructive purposes. It's up to us as a society to decide how we want to use that power.
And that brings us to the heart of the matter. What concrete steps can we take to use that power for good, to protect young people from online predators, and to create a digital world where they can thrive without fear of exploitation?
That's where the real work begins. It's a collective effort that requires parents, educators, lawmakers, tech companies, and young people themselves to work together to create a safer and more equitable online environment.
Okay, let's dive into those specific strategies and unpack what each of these stakeholders can do to contribute to this collective effort.
Sounds good. So we were talking about how important parents and educators are in all of this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that this can be a really, really difficult conversation to have. A lot of parents might feel overwhelmed or like they don't even know where to start.
Absolutely. It's not always easy to talk about these things, especially with younger children, but I think the key is to start early and to make these conversations a regular part of family life.
So it's not about having this one big scary talk about internet dangers. It's more about weaving these conversations into everyday interactions.
Right, exactly. It's about creating an open dialogue where kids feel comfortable coming to their parents with any questions or concerns they have about what they're seeing or experiencing online.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. But, the digital world is constantly changing. It seems like there's a new app or platform popping up every day. How can parents possibly keep up with all of that?
It's true, technology moves so fast, but luckily the fundamental principles of online safety really stay the same. It's all about teaching young people to be discerning about what they see and share online, to be respectful in their interactions, and to learn how to recognize and avoid potential risks.
So it's not necessarily about knowing every single app or platform, but more about equipping them with those critical thinking skills to navigate the digital world safely.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to be responsible digital citizens, capable of making good decisions about their online behavior.
And I imagine part of that empowerment involves setting some clear boundaries and expectations right. Things like screen time limits and privacy settings.
Absolutely. Just like we set boundaries in the physical world, we need to do the same in the digital world. It's about establishing clear guidelines for things like screen time, appropriate content, and privacy settings.
Yeah, but those boundaries can be tough to enforce, especially as kids get older and start pushing for more independence. They might resist the rules or try to find ways around them.
That's where those open lines of communication and trust come in. It's
Ah.
not about being super strict or controlling. It's about having honest conversations about why these rules are in place and what the potential consequences of risky behavior can be.
So it's a balance between giving them the freedom to explore and learn online while also setting appropriate boundaries to protect their safety.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where they feel empowered to explore, but also safe and supported.
This is all great in theory, but I'm sure a lot of parents are probably thinking, Okay, but how do I actually do this?
Hmm.
Are there any resources out there that can help parents navigate these challenges?
There are tons of great resources available for parents and educators. Organizations like Common Sense Media and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children offer really helpful guides, tips, and even conversation starters to help families talk about these difficult topics.
So parents don't have to feel like they're figuring this all out on their own. There are experts out there who can help.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that online safety is a constant conversation, not just a one-time thing. It's about staying informed, adapting to new technologies, and continuing to have open and honest conversations with young people as they grow.
That makes sense. And speaking of staying informed, I think we also need to talk about the technical side of online safety. We've talked a lot about the psychological and social aspects, but what about the nuts and bolts of protecting ourselves online? Things like privacy settings, security software, and recognizing phishing scams.
That's a critical piece of the puzzle. It's not enough to just talk about online safety. We need to give people the actual tools and knowledge to protect themselves in the digital world. And that includes understanding some basic cybersecurity principles.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are some of those essential cybersecurity basics that everyone should know no matter how tech savvy they are?
Well, first and foremost, strong passwords are absolutely essential. We need to move beyond those simple, easy-to-guess passwords and start using password managers to create and store unique passwords for each online account.
Ugh, I know I'm guilty of using the same password for multiple things.
Yeah.
It's just easier to remember, but you're saying that's a big mistake.
It's a huge risk. If one account gets compromised, then all of your accounts using that same password are vulnerable.
Okay, point taken. Strong and unique passwords for every account. Got it. What else?
Another important step is enabling two-factor authentication whenever you can. That adds an extra layer of security by requiring a unique code, usually sent to your phone or email, in addition to your password when you log in.
So even if someone steals your password, they still can't get into your account without that extra code.
Exactly. It makes it much harder for hackers to get in.
Okay, so strong passwords, two-factor authentication, anything else?
Definitely be wary of phishing scams. Those are attempts to trick you into revealing sensitive information, like passwords or credit card details, often through emails or websites that look legitimate.
So basically, don't click on any suspicious links or open attachments, and always double-check the sender's email address before replying.
Exactly. And if something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Good advice in general, not just online. All of this technical stuff can feel overwhelming, though, especially for people who aren't super comfortable with technology.
It can be a lot, but there are plenty of resources out there to help. There are websites and tutorials that explain these concepts in really simple terms. And there are even software programs that can help you manage your passwords, protect your devices from malware, and keep an eye on your accounts for any suspicious activity.
So there's no excuse for not taking these precautions. It's about investing a little time and effort to protect ourselves online, just like we do in the real world.
Exactly. It's about making online safety a part of our everyday routines.
And I think that's a key takeaway from all of this. Online safety isn't just about having one big talk or installing a software program. It's about weaving these principles into our daily lives, both online and offline.
I agree. It's about creating a culture of online safety where we're all looking out for each other.
And part of that is recognizing that online predation isn't just a problem for young people. It can affect anyone, regardless of age, gender, or social status.
That's so important to remember. We often focus on protecting children, which is of course crucial, but adults can be vulnerable too, especially those who might be isolated or going through a tough time.
So we all need to be aware of the warning signs and know how to support someone who might be experiencing this type of abuse.
Absolutely. And that support can look different for everyone. Sometimes it's just about listening without judgment, offering words of encouragement, or helping them connect with resources that can provide more specialized help.
And speaking of resources, are there any specific organizations or hotlines that you would recommend for victims of online predation or their loved ones?
Definitely. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, 800-656-APP, is a great resource. They provide confidential support and guidance for victims of any kind of sexual violence, including online abuse.
And for anyone struggling with suicidal thoughts, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24/7. Just dial 988.
Those hotlines are lifelines for people in crisis. It's so important to make sure everyone knows about these resources and how to access them.
It's about creating that safety net both online and offline so that no one have to go through this alone.
Exactly. We need to foster a culture of support and compassion where people feel empowered to reach out for help when they need it.
And I think that's such a powerful message, especially in the context of this conversation. The shame and secrecy surrounding online predation often prevent people from coming forward, and that silence only protects the abusers.
You're right. We need to break that silence and create a culture where victims feel safe and supported speaking out.
And that starts with open and honest conversations about these issues, not just in private, but in public forums like this.
I agree. We need to shine a light on these dark corners of the internet and make it clear that this kind of abuse is never okay and it won't be tolerated.
This conversation has really highlighted how complex this issue is and why we need such a comprehensive approach to prevention, intervention, and support. But I think it's also important to acknowledge the resilience of the human spirit and the power of hope.
That's such an important point. Even in the face of incredible trauma, there is always hope for healing and recovery.
And that healing often starts with taking that first step, reaching out for help.
Absolutely. Whether it's confiding in a friend or family member, calling a hotline, or seeking professional therapy, taking that step to reach out is a powerful act of self-care and empowerment.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, we're not alone. There are people who care, who understand, and who want to help.
And there's always hope for a brighter future.
This has been a really insightful and at times challenging conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, from the psychology of online predators to the technical aspects of cybersecurity and the resources available for support and healing. But I think one of the key takeaways for me has been the importance of community and connection.
I couldn't agree more. In the face of such darkness, it's the connections we build, the communities we create, and the support we offer each other that will ultimately make the difference.
And it's those connections, both online and offline, that can help us create a safer and more compassionate world for everyone.
Beautifully said.
We're back, and before the break, we're really diving into the importance of community and connection when it comes to supporting victims of online predation.
And that's a great transition into what I wanted to talk about next, which is the legal and law enforcement perspective on all of this.
Right, because we've talked about the emotional and social impact, but now I think it's important to look at how the legal system is dealing with these crimes, especially in cases that cross international borders, like the one with Cimarron.
Yeah, it's a really tricky area of law because legislation is always trying to catch up with technology, and the tactics that these online predators are using are constantly evolving.
So it's like a never-ending game of cat and mouse with lawmakers trying to stay one step ahead.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have people who specialize in cybercrime who not only understand the technology, but also the psychology behind these offenses.
It seems like law enforcement is facing a whole new set of challenges in the digital age. How are they even adapting their investigative techniques to track down these predators and get the evidence they need to prosecute them?
Well, it takes a lot of specialized training, new technology, and a deep understanding of how the online world works. They're using all these advanced tools to track digital footprints, analyze online communications, and they're having to work with agencies in other countries to build cases.
It's like detective work has gone totally digital now.
Yeah, it's super complex, but it's also extremely important work. They're the ones protecting our communities from these predators, and their work is really making a difference in bringing these criminals to justice.
And speaking of justice, the article mentions that McCartney pled guilty to 185 charges, including manslaughter, which is pretty rare to see an online predator actually held accountable for the death of a victim.
It's a landmark case for sure. It sets a precedent for holding online predators responsible for the real-world consequences of their actions. That decision sends a strong message that the internet is not a lawless place. Actions have consequences even online.
It's a huge step forward for victims' rights. But I imagine there's still a lot of challenges when it comes to prosecuting these types of cases.
Oh, definitely. Things like figuring out who has jurisdiction, getting evidence that will hold up in court, and the fact that technology is always changing make it really difficult.
And then there's the emotional trauma that the victims go through, having to relive everything as they go through the legal process.
It's a tough process for sure, but it's so important for victims to know that they're not alone. There are organizations out there like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and RAIN that can offer legal guidance and support to help them through it.
It's heartbreaking to think that there are so many people suffering in silence, feeling like they can't speak up.
Right, and that's why we have to create a culture where victims feel empowered to come forward knowing that they'll be believed and supported.
And that starts with education awareness and open dialogue. We need to make it absolutely clear that online predation is a crime and that victims deserve justice.
Absolutely. We need to shift the focus from blaming the victim to holding the perpetrator accountable.
We've been focusing a lot on the legal side of things, but I think it's important to step back for a second and think about the bigger picture. The societal impact of online predation. This isn't just a problem for the police to solve, it's a reflection of some deeper issues within our culture.
I completely agree. It's a symptom of a society that often objectifies and sexualizes people, especially women and children. And it's made worse by a culture of silence and shame that prevents victims from coming forward and getting help.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about changing those underlying cultural norms and attitudes that contribute to this problem.
Exactly. It's about challenging those harmful ideas that we see in the media and in our society. And it's about creating a culture of respect, consent, and empathy, both online and offline.
It's about recognizing that everyone, regardless of age, gender, or online presence, deserves to feel safe and respected.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And that safety and respect starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own actions and speaking up when we see something that's not right.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves and our loved ones, it's about actively building a more ethical and compassionate world for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about realizing that what we do online has real-world consequences, and that we all have a responsibility to make the internet a place that reflects our values of kindness, empathy, and respect.
This has been a really intense but important conversation. We've explored the tactics of online predators, the impact on victims, the challenges faced by law enforcement, and the bigger societal issues at play.
Yeah, it's been a lot to take in.
But I think it's important to end on a note of hope and empowerment.
I agree. So for our listeners out there who might be feeling overwhelmed by all of this, what can we offer them? What's the message of hope here?
What gives you hope?
Honestly, what gives me hope is knowing that change is possible. We're not helpless. We can educate ourselves and the people we care about. We can push for better lives, and we can support the organizations that are fighting to protect people and hold these abusers accountable.
And we can all choose to create a more positive and ethical online culture through our own choices and actions.
Yes, exactly. Every single thing we do online matters. Every click, every comment, every share, it's all a chance to make the internet a safer, more respectful, and more compassionate place.
It's about remembering that even in the darkest corners of the internet, there's always light, and that light comes from our commitment to building a better world.
Well said.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's been a privilege to have you with us to share your expertise and insights on such a complex and challenging topic.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners out there, remember, you're not alone. If you or someone you know needs help, please reach out. There are resources available, and there's always hope. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep diving deep.